The Cartier ring on her finger was supposed to be a promise. Instead, it was a price tag, betrayed on the eve of her wedding by the man who called her too massive to love. Clara did the unthinkable. She walked straight into the arms of Chicago's most ruthless mafia boss. The air inside the Vera Wang flagship boutique on Chicago's exclusive Oak Street smelled of vanilla, expensive champagne, and suffocating expectations. Clara Blake stood on the circular pedestal, staring at the three-way mirror. She was a size 20, a fact she had made peace with years ago, but the high society mafia circles of the city had not. In a world where the wives and daughters of syndicate bosses were expected to be size 0 trophies wrapped in Gucci and quiet submission, Clara was an anomaly. She had curves that couldn't be starved away, a soft, full face and a presence that took up space. Just a little tighter around the bodice, madam. The head seamstress murmured around a mouthful of pins, her fingers working frantically to adjust the custom ivory silk. Clara sighed, her breath hitching against the rigid boning of the corset. Please don't pull it any tighter, Beatrice. I need to be able to breathe during the vows. She was marrying Dominic Rossi, the ambitious golden boy underboss of the South Side Syndicate. It was a strategic alliance brokered by Clara's father, Thomas Blake, who controlled the lucrative shipping routes and logistics along Navy Pier and the Calumet River. Clara wasn't foolish enough to believe it was a fairy tale romance, but Dominic had been charming. He had brought her hydrangeas, taken her to private dinners at Alenia, and told her that her mind was her most beautiful asset. She had allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he saw past her weight. "He is here, Miss Clara," one of the assistants chimed, peeking through the heavy velvet curtains. "Mr. Rossi has arrived for the final approval." Clara's heart did a nervous flutter. She smoothed her hands over the heavy silk skirt. She knew she looked beautiful, but the lingering insecurity, the whispers she heard at gala dinners about the fat Blake girl, always clawed at her confidence. "Give me a moment alone," Clara asked the attendants. "I want to surprise him." The women bowed out of the fitting room, leaving Clara alone in the quiet luxury. She stepped off the pedestal, intending to walk out to the private viewing lounge. But as she approached the heavy velvet drape separating her from the corridor, she heard voices. Muffled, but unmistakable. It was Dominic, and a woman's voice, a familiar, breathless laugh that made the blood freeze in Clara's veins. It was her own cousin, Chloe. "You have to go in there, Dom," Chloe giggled, the sound wet and intimate. "Your bride is waiting to show off her tent." Clara stopped dead. Her hand hovered over the velvet fabric. "Don't remind me," Dominic's voice groaned, laced with a venomous disgust that Clara had never heard from him before. "I just had 2 shots of Patron in the car just to stomach looking at her. The seamstresses must be working miracles to fit all that into one dress." "You're awful," Chloe teased, though she didn't sound bothered. There was the distinct sound of lips meeting, a wet, sloppy kiss. "How are you going to manage the wedding night? You might get lost in there. Or crushed." "I'll turn off the lights and pretend it's you, baby," Dominic said, his voice dropping into a dark, cruel register. "I just have to survive a few months. Once the ring is on her pudgy finger, her father's shipping routes belong to my family. After that, I'll set her up in some estate in the suburbs and leave her to eat herself to death. I'm marrying the ports, Chloe, not the pig." The word struck Clara like physical blows, a brutal, agonizing strike to her chest that knocked the wind out of her. Pig. Tent. Pretend it's you. Every insecurity, every fear she had ever harbored about her body, had just been weaponized by the man she was supposed to marry in 3 days. Her vision blurred with hot, angry tears. She looked down at the beautiful, incredibly expensive dress that suddenly felt like a straitjacket. He didn't love her. He didn't even respect her. She was just a massive, grotesque stepping stone to his empire. Most women in her position bred to be quiet mafia wives would have cried, wiped their tears, and walked down the aisle anyway. It was business, but Clara was her father's daughter. She threw the velvet curtains aside. Dominic and Chloe jumped apart. Chloe's lipstick was smeared across Dominic's jaw. He was wearing a custom Tom Ford suit, looking every bit the handsome mafia prince. But in that moment, to Clara, he looked like a rat. Clara, Dominic stammered, his eyes widening as he took in her flushed, tear-streaked face. "How much of that did you—" "Enough," Clara said. Her voice didn't shake. The sorrow had instantly crystallized into a cold, terrifying rage. She reached for her left hand and forcefully yanked the 3-carat Cartier diamond engagement ring off her finger. It scraped her knuckle, but she didn't care. She threw it directly at his face. It bounced off his cheekbone with a sharp smack and rolled away onto the plush carpet. "You don't get the ports, Dominic," Clara said, her voice echoing in the silent hallway of the boutique. "And you certainly don't get me. You and my cousin deserve each other. You're both cheap." "Clara, wait. You're being hysterical. It's just a joke." Dominic lunged forward, grabbing her bare arm. His grip was entirely too tight. "Your father gave his word. You call this off. It's war between our families. You think anyone else is going to want you? Look at yourself." "I'm the best you'll ever get." Clara looked him dead in the eye, fully aware of her size, her presence, and her power. "I'd rather be alone for the rest of my life than share a bed with a parasite." She ripped her arm from his grip, turned around, and demanded the seamstresses cut her out of the dress. 30 minutes later, Clara Blake walked out of the Vera Wang boutique in a simple, oversized trench coat, leaving a shattered engagement and a looming gang war in her wake. The rain in Chicago was unforgiving that night, slicking the neon-lit streets of River North. Clara hadn't gone home. If she went home to the family estate in Lake Forest, she would have to face her father. She would have to explain why the alliance was broken, and she couldn't bear to say the words out loud. "He didn't want me because I'm fat." Instead, she found herself at the Berkshire Room, a dimly lit, high-end cocktail lounge known for its discretion. She sat in a corner booth, cloaked in shadows, a half-empty gin martini sitting in front of her. She felt numb. "I heard the Rossi boy is missing a Cartier ring and a bride." The voice was low, rich, and resonated like rolling thunder. It carried an undeniable authority that made the hairs on the back of Clara's neck stand up. She looked up. Standing by her booth was Victor Cassano. Every instinct Clara had screamed at her to run. Victor Cassano was the boss of the North Side outfit. He was 35, built like a heavyweight boxer, and notoriously ruthless. Unlike the flamboyant, loud gangsters of Dominic's generation, Victor was old school. He was lethal, calculated, and quiet. Rumors of what he had done to the Russian Bratva bosses in a warehouse down by the South Loop in 2022 were still used as cautionary tales to keep foot soldiers in line. He wore a bespoke charcoal Brioni suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His dark eyes, sharp as obsidian, locked onto Clara. There was a jagged scar cutting through his left eyebrow, a souvenir from his violent ascent to the top. "Mr. Cassano," Clara said, trying to keep her voice steady. "If you're here to kill me, to strike a blow to my father, I'd ask that you let me finish my drink first." A faint, dangerous smirk played on Victor's lips. Without asking permission, he slid into the leather booth opposite her. "If I wanted you dead, Clara Blake, you wouldn't have made it through the front doors. I'm here because we have a mutual problem, and a mutual opportunity." He signaled the bartender with a subtle nod, and within seconds, a glass of Macallan 25 was placed before him. "I don't do business for my father," Clara said, pulling her trench coat tighter around her body, suddenly self-conscious. Victor was a man who dated European supermodels. Being under his intense, unblinking scrutiny made her feel exposed. I know. I'm not here to talk to your father. I'm here to talk to you. Victor took a slow sip of his scotch. Word on the street is you publicly humiliated Dominic Rossi today. Called off the wedding. His father is furious. Your father is scrambling. Tomorrow they're going to try and force you back into that engagement to keep the peace. Clara gripped her glass, her knuckles turning white. I'll never go back to him. I know you won't. You have too much fire for a rat like Dominic, Victor said, his gaze dropping briefly to her hands, then back to her eyes. But your father needs an alliance to protect the ports. Dominic needs the ports to move his product. If they unite, they come after my territory. I can't have that. So what do you want from me? Clara asked, exasperated. To assassinate him. I want you to marry me. The jazz music playing softly in the background seemed to stop. Clara stared at him, her mouth slightly open. Excuse me. You heard me, Victor said, leaning forward, resting his massive forearms on the table. The scent of sandalwood and danger washed over her. You need protection from Dominic and your father's pressure. I need the Navy Pier shipping route securely allied with my family, out of Rossi's hands. We get married, a legally binding, very public union. The Blake and Cassano families unite. The Rosses are boxed out, permanently. Clara let out a harsh, bitter laugh. Is this a joke? First Dominic, now you. You want to marry me for the ports. At least you have the decency to be upfront about it, rather than pretending to love me while calling me a pig behind my back. Victor's expression darkened. The temperature in the booth seemed to drop 10 degrees. Is that what he called you? Clara looked away, her cheeks burning with shame. It doesn't matter. It matters, Victor said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly soft register. Dominic is a shallow, weak boy who couldn't handle a real woman if you broke his jaw. I'm not Dominic. He reached across the table. His large, calloused hand covered hers. The warmth of his touch sent a jolt of electricity up her arm. He didn't recoil from the softness of her hand. His thumb gently stroked her knuckles. Listen to me carefully, Clara, Victor said, his dark eyes burning into hers with an intensity that left her breathless. This is a business arrangement, yes, but I do not mistreat what is mine. You will be my wife. You will wear my name. Anyone who speaks a word against you, who looks at you with anything less than absolute respect, will answer to me. I don't care about the number on the scale. I care about loyalty, brains, and a backbone. You stood up to a capo today and threw a ring in his face. That is the kind of woman I want ruling by my side. Clara swallowed hard. Nobody had ever spoken to her like this. Nobody had ever looked at her size and seen strength instead of a liability. And if I say yes, she whispered, then tomorrow morning we walk into the Rossi family compound together. Victor stated calmly, a wicked gleam in his eye. We announce our engagement. We watch Dominic realize he just lost the ports, his pride, and the smartest woman in Chicago to his worst enemy. Clara looked down at Victor's hand, strong and unwavering over hers. She thought of Dominic's cruel laughter. She thought of the restrictive silk dress that tried to mold her into something she wasn't. Victor wasn't asking her to shrink. He was asking her to stand tall. All right, Victor, Clara said, lifting her chin, a spark of dangerous resolve igniting in her chest. Let's go ruin my ex-fiance's life. The morning sun over the affluent suburb of Oakbrook did nothing to thaw the ice in Clara's veins. She sat in the back of Victor Cassano's armored Mercedes Maybach 6'8", watching the sprawling, manicured lawns of the Rossi family estate approach. The wrought iron gates, adorned with the Rossi family crest, swung open, granting them entry into the belly of the beast. Clara wore a tailored emerald green trench coat over a sleek black wrap dress that hugged her curves. She had spent her entire life attempting to camouflage her size in muted colors and draped fabrics, desperate to minimize the space she occupied. Today she wanted them to see her. She wanted Dominic to look at the woman he had called a pig and recognize the architect of his destruction. "Nervous?" Victor asked. His voice was a low rumble over the purr of the Maybach's engine. He sat beside her, exuding the terrifying calm. He wore a navy blue Brioni suit, a platinum Rolex day date glinting on his thick wrist. "Not anymore," Clara replied, turning her gaze to him. "I spent my whole life being afraid of not being enough for these people. Turns out I'm too much for them, and I'm perfectly fine with that." Victor's mouth curved into a dangerous, approving smile. "Good girl. Let me do the heavy lifting with Carmine. You just deliver the kill shot to Dominic." The car glided to a halt in front of the massive limestone portico. Heavily armed Rossi enforcers, men Clara had known since childhood, stiffened as Victor stepped out. To see the boss of the Northside outfit on Southside territory without a brokered sit-down was unheard of. To see him walk around to the other side of the car and offer his hand to Dominic Rossi's runaway bride was a declaration of war. Clara took Victor's hand. His grip was an anchor, heavy and grounding. Together they walked up the grand staircase. Inside the opulent foyer, chaos was already brewing. Clara's father, Thomas Blake, stood near the grand piano, red-faced and shouting at Carmine Rossi, the aging, ruthless patriarch of the South Side. Dominic stood off to the side, looking pale and hungover, a glass of bourbon trembling slightly in his hand. Chloe was nowhere to be seen, likely discarded the moment she stopped being convenient. "I don't care what she said, Thomas," Carmine roared, slamming a fist onto a marble console table. "The wedding happened Saturday. We have millions tied up in the Calumet River expansion. You will find that ungrateful, fat cow of a daughter, and you will drag her to the altar, or I will take the ports by force." "You won't be taking anything, Carmine," a voice boomed from the doorway. The silence that followed was deafening. Every head snapped toward the entrance. Thomas Blake dropped his cigar. Carmine's hand crept instinctively toward the holster hidden beneath his blazer. Dominic's jaw went slack, the glass of bourbon slipping from his fingers to shatter over the Persian rug. "Clara," Thomas gasped, taking a step toward his daughter, before his eyes darted to the man standing possessively at her side. "Victor Cassano, what is the meaning of this?" "It means your daughter has upgraded, Thomas," Victor said smoothly, leading Clara into the center of the room. He didn't break eye contact with Carmine. "And it means the South Side's monopoly on the waterfront is officially dead." Dominic stepped forward, his face twisting into an ugly sneer. He looked at Clara, then at Victor, letting out a hollow, mocking laugh. "You've got to be kidding me. Cassano, you're pulling a stunt with her. What, did you lose a bet? Or are you just that desperate for the shipping routes that you'd scrape the bottom of the barrel to take my leftovers?" Victor didn't raise his voice. He didn't even pull a weapon. He simply closed the distance between himself and Dominic in 3 long, predatory strides. Before Dominic's bodyguards could twitch, Victor's massive hand clamped around Dominic's throat, lifting the younger man an inch off the floor. "Say another word about my fiancé," Victor whispered, his voice vibrating with lethal intent, "and I will tear your tongue out of your head and feed it to the stray dogs in the loop. Nod if you understand me, little boy." Dominic clawed frantically at Victor's wrist, his face turning a mottled purple. He gave a jerky, terrified nod. Victor released him, letting the underboss collapse onto the shattered glass, gasping for air. "Victor, are you out of your mind?" Carmine bellowed, drawing his weapon. In a flash, Victor's men, who had quietly filtered into the room, drew their custom Glock 19s. A deadly standoff materialized in Dominic's childhood living room. "Put the gun away, Carmine," Clara said. Her voice cut through the tension clear, loud, and utterly devoid of fear. She walked past the armed men, stepped right up to the mahogany coffee table, and retrieved a thick manila folder from her designer tote bag. She tossed it onto the table. "My father and I had a long talk this morning before we arrived." Clara lied seamlessly, though she had practically forced her father's hand in the Maybach 30 minutes prior by explaining the alternative was a bloodbath he couldn't win. "The Blake family is dissolving our tentative alliance with the Rossi Syndicate, effective immediately." Clara looked directly down at Dominic, who was still coughing on the floor. "To make it perfectly clear what you lost, because you couldn't keep your mouth shut in a bridal boutique," Clara said, her tone dripping with ice. "Let's review the new reality of Chicago's logistics." Carmine stared at the printed documents Clara laid out, the color draining from his face. "Thomas, you can't allow this. She's giving him the keys to the kingdom." "I'm giving it to a man who respects our family," Clara corrected sharply. "A man who doesn't kiss my cousin in a dressing room while laughing about how much he despises my body. You wanted a business deal, Dominic. Consider yourself bankrupt." Dominic stared at her, horrified. The realization of what his arrogance had cost his family was finally setting in. "Clara, please. I was drunk." Chloe meant nothing. It was just a stupid joke. "It wasn't a joke," Clara said, stepping back into the protective, warm presence of Victor, who wrapped a heavy arm around her waist. "It was the truth. And the truth is, you're not half the man you think you are." Goodbye, Dominic. 6 weeks later, the grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel was transformed into a vision of dark, unapologetic opulence. Unlike the sterile ivory and white affair Dominic had planned, Victor had insisted on a celebration that matched Clara's spirit. The room was draped in deep burgundy velvet, illuminated by thousands of flickering candles and dripping with black magic roses. Clara stood in the bridal suite, looking into a floor-to-ceiling mirror. There was no Vera Wang corset trying to squeeze her into a socially acceptable mold. Instead, she wore a custom-made gown by a master atelier in Milan, flown in strictly for Victor's bride. The dress was a masterpiece of black and gold brocade, with a sweetheart neckline that celebrated her full chest and a flowing skirt that draped elegantly over her wide hips and thick thighs. She looked like a queen. She looked powerful. She looked like herself. "You take my breath away." Clara smiled, watching Victor step into the room through the reflection in the mirror. He was dressed in a tailored black tuxedo, the jagged scar on his eyebrow making him look beautifully dangerous. "Is it too much?" she asked, a brief, fleeting echo of her old insecurities surfacing. Victor walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back flush against his solid chest. He kissed the sensitive skin just below her ear, sending a shiver down her spine. "There is no such thing as too much when it comes to you, Mia Regina. You are exactly as you are meant to be." Their marriage, born of a ruthless business transaction, had blossomed into something profoundly real over the past month. Victor had systematically dismantled the Rossi family's operations, true to his word. But more importantly, he had systematically dismantled the walls around Clara's heart. He didn't just tolerate her body, he worshipped it. Behind closed doors, there were no crude jokes, no subtle hints about dieting, only a fierce, consuming passion that left Clara breathless and entirely cherished. "Speaking of too much," Victor murmured, turning her around to face him, "I have a wedding gift for you. Call it a twist to our celebration." Clara arched an eyebrow. "You already gave me a black diamond necklace, Victor. What more could you possibly have done? I brought you a rat." Victor gestured to his Capoligaim, who was standing quietly by the door. The man opened it, and two enforcers dragged a bruised, disheveled figure into the suite. It was Dominic Rossi. He was missing his expensive Tom Ford suit, now wearing a stained, ripped dress shirt. His face was bruised, his arrogant swagger entirely obliterated. Behind him, trembling in a cheap cocktail dress, was Chloe. Clara's eyes widened. "Victor, what is this?" "A week ago, Dominic attempted to hijack 3 of our shipping containers at O'Hare," Victor explained, his voice cold and analytical. "He thought if he could disrupt the pharmaceutical shipments, the Italian families in New York would lose faith in our new alliance. He failed, of course. My men intercepted him. I thought it only fitting that you decide his punishment before we say our vows." Dominic fell to his knees, his hands bound by zip ties. He looked up at Clara, tears streaming down his bruised face. "Clara, please, I'm begging you. He's going to kill me. He's going to ruin my father. We have nothing left," Chloe sobbed hysterically. "Clara, I'm sorry. He manipulated me. I didn't want to hurt you." Clara looked at the 2 people who had broken her heart and shattered her self-esteem. For years she would have done anything for their approval. She would have starved herself, shrunk herself, and stayed quiet just to be accepted into their polished, shallow world. Now, looking at them, she felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sorrow. Just the cold, clinical indifference of a woman who had ascended to a throne they couldn't even reach. "Let them go," Clara said. Dominic blinked, stunned. Victor looked down at her, a silent question in his dark eyes. "I said let them go," Clara repeated, stepping toward Dominic. The heavy brocade of her dress rustled against the hardwood floor. "Killing you, Dominic, would imply that you are a threat to me. You aren't. You are a bankrupt, pathetic man who has to live the rest of his life knowing that the woman he called a pig is the reason his family no longer has a seat at the table in this city." She looked at Chloe, who was shrinking back against the enforcers. "And you, Chloe, you can have him. You deserve exactly what he can provide for you now, absolutely nothing." Clara turned her back on them, facing her fiancé. "Get them out of my hotel, Victor. I have a wedding to attend, and they are ruining the aesthetic." A slow, terrifyingly proud smile spread across Victor's face. He nodded to his men. "You heard my wife. Throw them out. If I see either of them in Chicago after tonight, they go into the Calumet River." As Dominic and Chloe were dragged out, sobbing and broken, the heavy oak doors closed, leaving Clara and Victor alone once more in the quiet luxury of the suite. "You are a terrifying woman, Clara Cassano," Victor murmured, taking her hands and kissing her knuckles, right where the Cartier ring used to sit, now replaced by a massive, flawless black diamond. "I learned from the best," she whispered, stepping into his embrace. She wasn't a delicate mafia princess. She wasn't a shrinking violet. She was massive, she was powerful, and she was the queen of Chicago's underworld. And as the orchestral music began to swell from the ballroom below, Clara knew one thing for certain: she would never, ever make herself small for anyone again. If you love this story of Clara taking back her power and claiming her throne, don't forget to like this video. Who do you think got the better revenge, Clara with her business moves, or Victor with his ruthless loyalty? Let us know in the comments below. Hit that share button with your fellow Mafia romance fans and subscribe for more thrilling, dramatic stories every single week.